Cheers. Mostly.
Put this other one in the order. You want to see that one?
What was it Tracy said I had to avoid posh speak? Whatever that meant waffle. And there's a wee bit of waffle in there, but hopefully not too much. No, it was Tracy, Tracy Marshall, a Kent partner. She said that I needed to do it without the posh bits.
Welcome to Belfast Exposed Photography. My name is Johnny. I'm the exhibition officer here. This is our first live stream artist talks from Dublin. Firstly, a little bit of housekeeping for everyone in the building here. We are running a one-way system. So if you need the toilets, you go up through the lift to the one-way system when you come down the stairs, and back into the gallery space, and then you can take your seat again. Secondly, the artist talk is being recorded, so if everybody can keep quite silent during the talk, that would be appreciated. We do prefer if you wear masks. That's up to you, but we'll all be wearing masks once it starts. and we provide sanitisers and other amenities like that throughout the building. There will be a space at the end of each talk for asking questions, so if you want to ask any questions, then that's the time to do that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce David Copeland, MFA student, recent graduate, and he's going to give his first talk.
Hiya, my name's David Copeland, and I just graduated with my MFA from the Ulster University. And today I'm just going to give you a talk through my work and a bit of a walk through it too. My project is called A Place to Sleep, and A Place to Sleep started off as an exploration of my hometown. My hometown where I still live and have grown up all my life in. In the beginning, it was nothing more than a documentary take on a small commuter town that it was situated astride an ever-flowing river and the constant drone of the bypassing motorway that the A1 that drives past it. As in many other towns that sit on the edges of cities and the ends of motorways that connect their employees to their places of employment. The title of the project, A Place to Sleep, come out of a conversation that I was having with Ken at the time, just before I started my MFA, Ken Grant. I was talking at the time about this concept of a dormitory town or commuter town, and the suggestion that small towns have become introverted, and the idea that the people just use them for their basic needs, such as a place to eat, sleep, and die, to be a wee bit morbid about the whole situation. Quotes like that I found this by Chu Wei Fu, I think his name is pronounced. It's probably not, but we'll give that a go. Places are centres of felt value where biological needs are met, such as those for food, water, rest, and procreation are satisfied. But as the project developed, this became not only a physical place, but a psychological place, a state of place and a state of mind. Sleep might come to reference home, security, and comfort, somewhere to lay our heads at the end of a busy day. But at the same time, it can be morbid, rather to be put to sleep, rather maybe than to be fall asleep. Hopefully, I'm not putting you to sleep. It's always a possibility. My process, if you can call it that, begins with a walk. As do most of my projects, I tend to pick a camera up, usually for this one, initially my hometown, but most projects I work through by walking and seeing and make images. Initially photographing my hometown in a documentary context, making simple observations of the everyday, a bit like a street photographer, but without the brashness of the city or a need to capture some sort of decisive moment. Instead, I was creating quieter images that hope to evoke rather than provoke. At the same time as referencing common lived experience, I was also referencing taught experience. For example, literary influences such as Mark Twain's Tom Sawyer, a story of a boy living in a small town, riverside town, with ambitions beyond his own current existence. Including this quote in my final photo book, as I felt it spoke to the melancholy and the ideas and state of mind that I was trying to evoke in the viewer as they experienced the work. And even if the viewer can't relate to the work through lived experience or personal experiences, through taught experience, they can relate to the work through things like Mark Twain's quote, which I'll read out to you, which you probably can read yourselves, but anyway. He wandered far from the accustomed haunts of boys and sought desolate places that were in harmony with his spirit. A log raft in the river invited him, and he seated himself on its outer edge, contemplating the dreary vastness of the stream, wishing all the while that he could only be drowned and all at once unconsciously without undergoing the routine and uncomfortable nature. Routine the undergoing uncomfortable routine devised by nature. Including this quote in my final, as I suggested, I included it in my final photo book so that the viewer could relate or access the work through taught or lived experience. But even if you remove from its original context of Tom Sawyer, it still evokes all those kind of emotions and ideas that I'm trying to talk about within the work. As the project is developed, I began to consider how I was representing place and came to realize that my more objective approach wasn't working, as it overlooked my position within the work and place. Therefore, I felt it necessary to employ visual and conceptual strategies that looked beyond the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. It became more a story of place than a story of one particular place. Making images of abandoned remnants of childhood play, a football stuck in a tree, a crudely constructed raft in the river, a downed airplane, toy airplane. I don't know where it's a toy airplane or like a weather vane or something, I'm not sure, but it kind of evokes those ideas of childhood. So the idea of the raft becomes an idea of its own, a mythology, a symbol, that it not only through lived experience, but taught experience, it gives it meaning. In the same that it becomes a literary device and draws on those ideas of escape, survival, and making do, but with the fragility of childhood that we can all relate to. In recognizing their abandonment, I acknowledge a change in how we experience place and our position within the landscape, and how it evolves, how it is felt and used in youth before it become aware of life, its agenda, demands, and they become the boundaries that are holding us in place. The mundane and the everyday reminds us that it's set in a reality and that it is relatable. The unpeopled images from my series still explore humanity, and they're not inhumane. As Adura Welty writes in the introduction of William Eccleston's book, The Democratic Forest, the human being, the perpetrator, the victim, or the abandoner of what we see before us is the reason why these photographs of place have their power and move to disturb us. They always let us know that the human being is the reason they were made. Welty suggests that the human being is the reason that William Eccleston's photographs were made, but it's also the reason why my images are made, and I would say probably most projects are made because of the human being. I'm hoping that the viewers are considering the perpetrator, the victim, and the abandoner, or possibly all three, or four if you consider the photographer, which being a bit biased, but I do. Not that I haven't included people in my images in the series, but when I do include people in the landscape, most of them tend to be figures consumed by their surroundings, isolation, and darkness, shot from a distance usually, but there's always one exception that proves the rule, caught candidly and unaware of my presence. Whilst editing the sequence and putting the work together and making the selections, I've chosen to select images of males, young, old, and middle-aged. The idea being that they become to be a reflection or represent the past, present, or future self, as well as a timeline of the life cycle that is destined to repeat. I set about making images, although photographed in daylight, feel like night. The idea of turning day into night has its connotations that could be associated with sleep. I began to shoot in the evenings when the shadows were long and the light was difficult. The darkness informs a psychological boundary that keeps me here and by default creates a visual boundary for the viewer. So it kind of keeps them in the space, but also in the context of the book, keeps them moving through it in search of something, maybe the light at the end of the tunnel or something along those lines, or metaphors. While in search of a point of view and not being economically, statistically, or even geographically minded, as I know where I'm going. I just can't tell you how I'm getting there and how you might, so don't ask. In my mind just doesn't retain that kind of information. And you will have noticed that I haven't mentioned the place by name. And for those that are interested, it's Colgermore. It's about 20 minutes outside Belfast on a good day. But not mentioning the name or pinning it on a map, I suggest the irrelevance of that information, as although the town provides the boundaries or the setting for the work, if only to provide an understandable and relatable construct that allows the viewer into the work. So we all know what a small town is, and we can visualize that and have our own ideas of that. We might have our own experiences of a small town. It doesn't necessarily have to be my small town, but I'm allowing the viewer to bring their baggage to the work. Having moved away a couple of times, each time I find myself being drawn back by circumstances beyond my control, and a need for a place to sleep has me again stuck in these all too familiar surroundings. I joke at times it's like the song Hotel California by the Eagles. You can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave. All the images in the series have I've came across while walking, and this one was no different. Although it's slightly different to the images where the people are shot from a distance, it's still an image that I've came across, and they're consumed by darkness, but it's obviously referencing sleep too, with the idea of the guy sleeping with his eyes closed. And it also provides a close, for the viewer, the idea that I'm in close proximity of this too. It's not that I'm an outsider coming in to make the work, so that wee bit of closeness helps to put me in the work a wee bit more too. Identifying with the demands of place, each day I would circle its outer edge, and each day I would know that the end of today's walk was the beginning of tomorrow's. I never truly move forward, and I begin to realize that the small town and many others like it have become a setting for this existence destined to repeat. While designing the book, I wanted to create a physical and psychological experience for the viewer. The pages unfold as you go through the work, and in turn force the viewer to go back through the work in order to escape, bringing them back to where they started, referencing my process, as when working from home, I would always start and finish the shoot in the same place. In this, I'm creating an intentional issue for the viewer and referencing my process to evoke the psychological. So the idea of creating some kind of thing where it forces the viewer to think about it, and then they have to go back through it again. They start where they finish, and they finish where they start. So I create this staggered sequence from left to right and middle, printed on full bleed so the book replicates a rhythm of the walk as you go through it. Referencing my process, it repeats almost like a 12-bar blues walking. The project is probably made to the soundtrack of B.B. King's Live at the Regal, or Bob Dylan, or a lot of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Maybe their small town experiences seeped through my ears and shaped some of my own ideas. The sequence begins and ends with referencing the home and using the classic apex shape of the house. At this point, I'm just going to play you through a video of my dummy book, that if there's any publishers watching, hello. So feel free to have a look through this. I'll talk a wee bit, but I don't want to talk too much over it, not that there's any sound. So as you'll see, the casing of the book closes on both ends, so if it was sitting on a bookshelf, it would look exactly the same. Also has these three panels that kind of create a boundary in itself. So I'm constantly thinking of the viewer's experience and how I could use conceptual methods and physical methods to try and evoke something in the viewer when they see the work. the images will repeat too. So that idea of like almost like the 12-bar blues things where something repeats, you get repeated images, so that they live on their own, but also can live beside other images, which might change how you read the work too. And then, as you'll see in the video here, to get out of the book and to close it, I'm forcing the viewer to fold their way back through it, unless they're really lazy and just close it and be really annoying. You're not supposed to do that, it's not allowed. So yeah, this kind of experience where it becomes slightly awkward too is all part of that trying to evoke something in the viewer. It might really annoy them and they might never read it again, but if it's there to help provoke those kind of ideas. And you can see even the making of this video is quite awkward to put back together, but hopefully when that publisher that's watching is going to publish it, it'll make it a wee bit more ergonomic. And then you'll see, and you end right where you finished, or right where you started even. And there we go. And it's not going to let me skip. Oh. And I'll just leave you with this quote, which kind of finishes the passage of the original Tom Sawyer quote. At last he rose, sang, and departed into the darkness. And there we go. Got 15 minutes and 40 seconds. I don't know if that's about right, but there we go. Thanks for listening. There we go. Any questions? If anybody wants to know anything? Yeah?
You talked a little bit about the difference between provoke and evoke in kind of the intention for the viewer. Wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that, and then maybe what the intended experience is with the viewer. You sort of talked about like the book being maybe annoying.
Yeah. So the idea of evoke and provoke. So I see provoke as probably a bit more someone being pushed, whereas the idea of evoke is probably more I want them to feel something of their own too, or something a bit more emotional. It's not that they become like trying to shove something down their throat or make a big statement about something in particular. It's about creating an experience for the viewer too. And that idea of annoying them is not so much that I want the book to be totally annoying, it's just that it evokes something psychological, and that is kind of forcing them to consider the ideas, and also totally referencing my process and the idea of the flipping pages and that idea of replicating the rhythm of a walk as you go through it. So what I'm trying to do is put them in my shoes, but also make them consider their own experiences at the same time. I don't know if that answered your question, but...
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
I love the subject matter, David. I think it's very poignant. And I guess each artist can't raise this question, but what's next? You know, what's next for this work? It's a beautiful produced book that you made, but are you thinking of exploring this kind of ideology or methodology towards other small towns and other small villages, and other people's complexities with that, and their own struggles, or how do you see this progressing further?
In that sense, the idea of not actually pinning it down to any particular town, or that idea of removing the name of the town itself or placing it on a map, I think it kind of removes almost that attentional ability to go, if I visit every small town on the way to Belfast and make a piece of work, it's just going to be me doing the same thing in a slightly different place over and over again, which is not kind of the intention of the work. So my small town is everybody's small town. The idea of new work and making new work, I have a few ideas. They're still to do with place. I have maybe something to do a wee bit more with music or lyrics that I find that kind of reference this idea of place. What's the quote? There's a Willie Nelson song, of all songs, that has got a quote. He was looking for America in a Western movie, and it kind of interested me because it made me think of spaghetti westerns and the idea that they were all shot in Spain, and this idea of America too, that I love American music. I kind of love all that, so I actually love old spaghetti westerns too, the way they're shot and the way they're filmed. And then this perceived idea of what a place is, that we've seen America through the film and TV, and there's like how it's actually perceived, or how it actually is, which I don't know myself. So it wouldn't be about going to America to make a piece of work. It would be about finding America that isn't real, essentially, or finding the fake America not in America and referencing that. But like, that's only a rough idea that's floating about my head. Whether that goes anywhere or not, who knows? It's just kind of early stages. But yeah, I'm also on the Futures program here for things that I'm doing in the future. I'm in the Futures program here at Belfast Exposed. Our group, our MFA group, are starting up a collective called Anthropology 11, yeah, that's wrote in Roman numerals, and I'm incredibly dyslexic, so they don't help me. It's like numbers and words are bad, but when you've mixed the two of them together, whew. It's a bit like algebra. That wasn't a good idea. So yeah, I'm working on different things. So yeah, thanks, Ben. Yeah.
Basically test people's patience. And different areas of receptivity, because it's dark, and some people would see it that way, but as you said, the focus, focusiness of it. But I just, whenever you were talking about being annoying, I was just thinking, immediately saw that psychology test in my mind, to test people.
Yeah, it's like I created my own ink block test. Like a Rorschach test. Yeah, I kind of love that, because I've always kind of loved that, and the idea, I actually done research not that long ago about the Rorschach test, and it doesn't work because the person who's answering the questions is influencing the viewer. But I love that idea that it would provoke something, and then you could do a psychological thing on it. So the idea that it become a psychological experiment is kind of interesting. So yeah, cool, thanks. All good? No more questions? That's great. Thank you for listening. I hope I didn't ramble on too much.
David, right. Thank you very much. Big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just give us 1 minute as we switch around artists, and Lucy Jarvis was going to come up now. Next, and she's going to present her work, and again, there will be a space at the end for more questions. If you're watching this on the live stream, you can post questions in the comments online, and we will try to ask them at the end as well. Thank you.
Hiya. So thank you everyone here that's attended, and those that are online as well. My name's Lucy, as Johnny's just introduced there, and I'll first introduce myself by saying I'm an artist, photographer and environmental activist. My practice deals largely with rewilding, permaculture, ecological anthropology and journeys. I have a particular interest in conservation, land management and enclosures, whereby my work draws on a multifaceted approach to observation and documentation. I was born in southeast of England, as you can tell I'm not from here, and first graduated from the University of Creative Arts in 2017, where I studied my undergraduate degree in photography. I've since been based in Belfast to pursue my MFA at Belfast School of Art. I'm going to start my talk with a short quote. We accept the reality of the world with which we are presented, And this statement was actually made by Ed Harris whilst playing his role of Christoph in the film The Truman Show. To further understand Harris's words, it would be important to mention shift in baseline syndrome. Shift in baseline syndrome is a psychological and sociological phenomenon whereby each new human generation accepts as natural or normal the situation in which it was raised. With ongoing environmental degradation at local, regional and global scales, people's accepted thresholds for environmental conditions are continually being lowered. In the absence of past information or experience with historical conditions, members of each new generation accept the situation in which they were raised as being normal. This phenomenon is increasingly becoming recognised as one of the fundamental obstacles to addressing a vast number of issues surrounding climate breakdown. Through my work, Spring Calling, I aim to navigate the compulsive nature of humans to control and manage the land as a result of the detrimental impact to it caused by permanent land use. The work deals with the relationship between humans and the natural world and how much we believe we can improve it. The work focuses on a beaver rewilding project in Spain's Hall Estate, Essex, as well as 2 areas of managed coppice woodland, Poundwood, also in Essex, and Colin Glen here in County Antrim. Rewilding is a form of conservation that reintroduces native plants and species to create an effective rebalance in the food chain. This natural process allows the land to work with itself, resulting in a self-sufficient system where each species has a role to play in supporting one another. Rewilding, however, is a somewhat contradictory statement. Re as a prefix is often used along with the meaning of again or to state a repetition or backward motion of withdrawal. Wilding, on the other hand, signifies the wild, an animal or plant living in a natural environment, neither domesticated or cultivated, or that of the wild landscape, one that we speak of as untouched. The term rewilding therefore exists with its own predetermined implications, yet the conservation work that's happening as a result of this relatively new term is breaking boundaries worldwide. In 2019, a pair of European beavers were reintroduced to Spain's Hall Estate in Essex as part of the Slow the Flow finching build programme. The reintroduction follows the likes of the River Otter Beaver Rewilding Project initiated by Devon Wildlife Trust in 2016. Sees the beaver reintroduced to a native habitat after being hunted to extinction 400 years ago. The European beaver, as a keystone species, has a large effect on the surrounding environment by creating and maintaining extensive sea ecosystems, one of which results in naturally coppice woodlands. However, is traditionally carried out by a human workforce and the systematic rotation of tree harvesting, an ancient woodland management method that's been re-employed in Poundwood and Colin Glen to support the reintroduction of the rare heath fritillary butterfly in an attempt to conserve the species population. The close relationship of the beaver and butterfly and the circumstance in which they were both reintroduced allows us to understand the ways in which we've created habitats reliant on a manual workforce in order to keep populations sustained. Within the sequence of documents, empty moth traps are presented within the landscape, photographed out of season. These obtrusive constructions dominate the landscape in which a variety of species ought to be present. Yeah, sorry. Just there. Okay. Sorry about that. In making Spring Calling, I've been on a journey in which I returned home to Essex, a process that's allowed me to further question my own relationship to place and to develop inquiries into the meaning of a rewilded existence. Spring Calling aims to address our connections and relationship with the land and aims to understand the ways in which we control different habitats. In addition to 24 black and white photographs, the work is accompanied by the supplement publication, The Observer's Book of Rewilding, which has allowed for a direct conversation between the photographer's document along with map journeys, wind drawings and archival images. So there's a few here. The supplement draws on the engaging practice of being present within the world. In documenting these processes, I explore control and surrender mirrored in my own battle to use photography in its many forms as a tool to question and present information. These are a few excerpts from the book. And as you can see, it's quite small as opposed to what it looks like on the screen there. And this as well is a mixture of selection, a mixed selection of found imagery, personal imagery, wind drawings and traced walking routes, which are featured throughout the publication. And a closer look at some of the wind drawings that have been made as part of the supporting book document. Throughout making the work, I've often found myself as quite the frustrated documentary photographer. It's quite a strange space that I've found the work to end up being sitting in that a number of different conceptual elements have found their way into the work in one way or another. The supporting publication has really allowed these elements to become realised, such as that of control within the work, particularly through the use of these wind drawings. I'd create the drawings by first setting up a circular boundary for the pen, forcing a level of control and confinement to which the pen could not escape from. It would, however, be free to move wherever it wished within this boundary, and comparisons are to be drawn between the movement between the pen and methods in which we conserve and protect land by heavy management. The work has been inspired by the likes of Jan van Preston, Lucas Foglia, Barbara Bosworth, Andrew Bruce and Jan Gross, just to name a few artists, but most importantly by the writings of George Monbiot in his 2014 book titled Feral. In Feral, Monbiot speaks of the otherworldly landscape that we've shaped for ourselves to live in and the bizarre terms in which we inhabit and control these spaces. Having read Feral, I knew I visually needed to respond to Monbiot's writings. Fundamentally, the project has been about working with as opposed to against nature, to let it in rather than resist it. Something that really struck a chord for me was whilst reading Germaine Greer's book White Beach. In the book, Greer writes about her life in her newly acquired area of rainforest, and on one particular morning where she witnessed a large but unharmful spider make its way into her living room, Greer proceeds to write about her initial reaction to shoo the spider out of the house, but after some deeper considerations and thought, she realised that the spider was just as much entitled to be there as she was, and in that moment decided to let it stay, to live with rather than against. The title Spring Calling was prompted by another reading, which was that of Rachel Carson's 1962 book, Silent Spring. In the book, Carson writes about the dangerous use of pesticides across the USA, particularly the pesticide DDT, which was heavily used in an attempt to preserve the elm tree from the Dutch elm disease. The detrimental impact of this pesticide went on to affect huge numbers of bird populations, among many other insects, and actually in children as well. It's to be reflected through Carson's writings that the conservation land management put in place can be just as detrimental as it is beneficial. And I'm just going to end with a quote by Carson. To have risked so much in our efforts to mould nature to our satisfaction, and yet to have failed in achieving our goal, would indeed be the final irony. Yet this, it seems, is our situation. And that's me. Yeah, if anyone has any questions.
I was struck by the way you were talking about kind of the environment that you find yourself in is what you accept as normal. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was very applicable to current times with coronavirus and what we believe, how we were living was normal and what we are living now isn't. And I wondered if you feel like the work is applicable to other situations besides environmentalism and counterclockwise.
Absolutely. I guess I've only really looked at it from the environmental perspective, in that everything I've begun to, since reading the book Feral, I've reevaluated almost everything that I thought to know as normal. So I guess, it's definitely been applicable to the current situation. But definitely in terms of just life in general, like living, work, why are all of these things? It's made me question a lot of things basically, but definitely the environmental aspect has had a huge impact on everything, and just the way we would generally live our lives, I guess. So yeah, Thank you.
Beautiful work, Lucy.
Thank you.
Could you talk a little bit more about, I'm very fascinated how you used wind drones and other kind of elements besides photography within your practice. Could you possibly expand upon that a little bit more?
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I'd gotten to the point where the work, I'd been working in these 3 different locations for about 3 years, you know, revisiting them at different times of the year, etc. And there was just something missing, not so much from the photographs, but just to pull everything together for me personally. And I guess this is where the book had come in. So I started looking at, I was looking at archival imagery of how the Coppice woodlands had been managed since like the 90s, year and year and year after and after, you know, after again. And also just revisiting some of my own work that I'd maybe like shot on other mediums, you know, such as my phone, like little recce shoots that I'd been out and been to explore these places. And then the wind drawings. The wind drawings in particular were quite, it's something I'd done before a few years back. And for me, when it almost like passed through my brain, it was like, oh, it was just a really like tactical way of connecting with the place, and especially to be making them in the landscape that I'd been shooting in. Yeah, and so I think for me, just to be able to bring all of these things into the supplement publication just to support the photographs was quite interesting. But yeah, in a way where the photographs could sit by themselves, but also have the use of the book included. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say the phrase like my mum loves her garden and nature in general. And she's always said a weed is just a flower in the wrong place, and that just popped in.
Yeah.
Completely. Like humans try to control even through their garden.
Everything. Yeah.
I'm not even talking about the garden.
Yeah. Yeah, in so many situations.
And then also like I don't know how long you've been over here, but we have a lot of what we call manicure forests. So like you know, the Lord of the Manor hundreds of years ago, like I live Ormo.
Okay.
It's a manicure forest. Now it looks like very nature, but then if you go to proper forest, like we go somewhere like you know, down or you know, anywhere that's not been manicured, you know, yeah, they're just very different. You know, things like that, like really different as well. Not just beautiful, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
There's just something different about a non-manicured forest.
Absolutely, yeah, and I guess this comes full circle to what I'd started, you know, it's what we know and it's what we've been brought up with, and we go to the park and we're like, oh, we're going for a walk in, you know, and it is wonderful, but it's yeah, and it's so set to be a certain way so that it doesn't interfere with our experience or our day-to-day, or, you know, even when it comes to gardens and things, they're made in a way to fit us. And there's this whole thing that comes in, like the little wildflower patches and leaving the verges of the roads, and like all of these little things that are just not even considered can actually have such an important impact, you know, on the wider environment. So I guess, you know, something that I particularly wanted to express through the work is just to, one, reevaluate, you know, what kind of place am I in, you know, rather than to assume that everything that's green is nature, you know, why does this place look this way, you know, and what would it be like if we were to say, you know, reintroduce something that should actually be there to it. Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming down and participating in our talks, and thank you for everyone who was watching online. There's going to be another talk at the same time tomorrow, so if you're online you can tune in, and if you want to come round, come round. Okay. Thank you.